All right, howdy. So my name is Ashley Ferris. I'm the Cropping Systems Extension Entomologist and IPM Coordinator. I've been here at Oklahoma State for just under 2 years. In about 3 weeks, it will be exactly 2 years. And because if I don't do this, Brian will congratulate me. I'm not from Oklahoma. I am a Texan. So whether you like it or not, I'm here. But I'm going to talk with y'all today about cotton leaf hopper, or corn leaf hopper, and also talk about the two-spot cotton jacid, so that y'all can have an understanding of what we're potentially facing that may be coming into Oklahoma. Hasn't been confirmed here yet. But also talk about what we saw over the last 2 years for the corn leaf hopper and look into my crystal ball and tell you, will we have it or will we not in the coming year? So just a quick reminder about the corn leaf hopper. That's the pest we're going to talk about first. The corn leaf hopper is known as W matus, and so this insect is only going to reproduce on corn. It can be found in other habitats, but it's going to be using those other habitats as a water resource, and it cannot reproduce in them. So W matus can take about 8 to 11 days to proceed through its egg stage. They can lay, the females, anywhere between 130 up to over 600 eggs in their lifetime. So quite prolific in their fecundity, which is pretty impressive for a very small insect. Females will lay about 15 per day, and when they're laying them inside of the leaf tissue. So you're not going to see signs of the eggs themselves. They're just going to be inside of that leaf, usually along that midrib on the upper part of the veins. The nymphs, they can persist anywhere between 13 to 17 days. They have 5 nymphal instars. As they're feeding, they're going to get larger. They're going to cast that skin off. So I've got a picture here on this slide that's got the different sizes of some of these nymphs. They're usually going to be found in the whorls when we're talking about our vegetative corn. They're going to be on the underside of the corn leaves, on the lower leaves especially, for our reproductive corn. They have an aggregative behavior. So if you see one, you're probably going to see multiple ones of them there too. Then we've also got our adults. And so adults, there's quite a bit of variability in here, okay? So you see that overall in this reference, it talks about the life cycle taking anywhere between 21 to 28 days. There's been documented in the literature in different populations outside of the US and within Arizona and California of adults living up to 88 days whenever they have the right kind of environment for them. So this can be highly variable. We're still learning a lot about what holds true for our US populations of them. All right, so adults, when you look at them in the field, they're going to be very, very small. So they can be challenging to see. One thing you might note is some of this black honeydew or the sooty mold from honeydew. When they're feeding, they have to get rid of that excess water content, which can turn into mold when exposed to air and the environmental conditions. And then you have these cast skins, so the exoskeletons, and that's usually going to be evident when you have high populations and they're reproducing there in the field. That cast skin is not characteristic just for corn leaf hoppers, all sorts of leaf hoppers, so don't use that as your only guide point. You do need to be able to identify this insect. So what we know, females, they actually improve their survivorship when they're infected with one of these pathogens, corn stunt spiroplasma. They actually can survive better at colder temperatures than when they're uninfected. Cold tolerance, they can persist at 23 degrees Fahrenheit or above. And so temperatures below that 23 degrees Fahrenheit or at 23 degrees Fahrenheit, they usually live for about 8 hours, okay? So that's kind of the good news for us and our northern states is that we usually do have a period of cold, persistent freeze that lasts longer than this 8 hours time. And then we can have anywhere between 2 to 12 generations per year. In Arizona, though, they've documented up to 14 generations per year. And they can survive for about 9 weeks off of corn. And when they're off of the corn plant, primarily, they're looking for a green host, a place to hang out until they can find corn that they can move into, reproduce, and transmit and path on those pathogens. So over the last time that I was here, we did look at some overwintering potential. I want to note that these leaf hoppers don't truly overwinter. Again, they're not going to have a stage that can survive the cold temperatures. Instead, what they do is they seek out these alternate hosts. The good news is with these alternate hosts, again, they can't reproduce on it, and they also are unable to transmit pathogens. So there's no evidence of pathogen detection inside of these other types of materials. So when we looked at this last year, the last time that we found corn leaf hoppers out in the field in these different environments was actually around December of 2024. So we didn't have any populations that stayed here between the last infestation we had and this year. Anything we got this year came up out of the south. So when these leaf poppers are moving, typically they're going to move around Mexico through El Norte winds. Corn leaf hoppers originated in Mexico, where we had corn domesticated about 8,000 to 9,000 years ago. So there's a close association of the insect with the plant, as well as with the pathogens that are associated with causing corn stunt disease. Stronger winds are going to move them out of Mexico. They can move them historically into places like the Gulf Coast states. Primarily, we've had documentation of this before in California, Mississippi, Texas, and also in Florida. What's going to cause them to migrate environmentally are going to be things like shorter day length. So that photo period, they're very sensitive to this, which is not a surprise. Most insects are. They're also going to have a reaction to cooler nighttime temperatures, wanting to move north where there's hopefully going to be warmer temperatures available for them. And then also senescing plants is also going to be a cue for them to go ahead and migrate to other locations. So again, they can find a green resource. So I'm going to give a brief history, and I want y'all to keep this in mind whenever y'all are asking me or thinking about what's going to happen in the future, okay? So look at some of these cycles that we've had. For the US, we had our first report of corn stunt in California in 1945, but it wasn't actually characterized as a disease until 1946. And this was based on having an outbreak in the lower Rio Grande Valley in Texas. So when we talk about Texas, that's true South Texas that we're thinking of. Then in 1964, the next time we see that corn stunt pops up in the literature is going to be because we had a corn stunt spiroplasma outbreak in Florida, Louisiana, and Mississippi. And then in the 70s going throughout the 80s, we also see that we have populations of Dabulus matus, the corn leaf hopper, in locations like California. Throughout the 80s, then we have several reports of populations of it in California, Central California primarily. So there's concerns this is possibly an endemic population that we have there. And then we also had an outbreak in the late 70s there in Florida and Texas as well, but not persisting populations. Pretty quiet in terms of where exactly we were having outbreaks up until 2016. And it's really important to note that when there was an outbreak of the corn leaf hopper in 2016 in the lower Rio Grande Valley, there was actually not an outbreak of corn stunt, okay? So we have two independent things working in the system. We have the insect, and then we also have the pathogens they can transmit. Sometimes you can have a high population of the insect and no pathogens. Sometimes you can have a high population or a high amount of the pathogens available, but not a high population of insects. Sometimes they're in sync together, which is what I think happened for us in 2024. So 2024 is whenever we had Dabulus matus and corn stunt spiroplasma, one of the pathogens, confirmed in 13 states in the US. So when we talk about identification, some of y'all are getting really, really good at this, which I very much appreciate when y'all send me great pictures and know what you're looking for now. Some of us get a little anxious and we want to have a little more verification, which is totally fine. I'm happy to help with that. But overall, we're looking at a leaf hopper that is yellow to tan in color. It can be a little bit darker in appearance just because as the insect ages, cuticle can also change with time and darken. There's also light morphs and dark morphs. So it's not always going to be this perfectly bright, pretty yellow that you see here. They're going to be about the size of a grain of wild rice is what I would say, torpedo in shape. They have two black dots between their eyes, as well as a very clean face, no other markings. It's important to mention this because we have lots of other leaf hoppers in our corn that just occur naturally and do not cause us problems. These leaf hoppers also occur in a lot of other types of crops, horticultural as well as agronomic. So just be aware that there are some lookalikes that are out there. When you're talking about something very, very small, it's very easy to get confused and to think you may be seeing something that's not there. I would say our biggest offender that we have is our aster leaf hopper. So if you're curious really how to tell apart the difference on this, I put together earlier this year a document that kind of breaks down the differences of these leaf hoppers. Here, it probably looks very obvious to you. These are clearly two different insects, but when you're in the field, it's not that easy, okay? Again, we're talking about size being very, very different. So we know that corn stunt disease is caused by 4 different pathogens. 2 of them are bacteria, 2 are viruses. The reason I have these 3 in a box here are because these are the 3 that have been confirmed in the US. The 4th is one that I believe has only been found in Brazil. So for the ones that we're primarily concerned with in terms of detection are going to be corn stunt spiroplasma. That seems to be the most pervasive, most common one associated with corn stunt disease in the US. Maize bushy stunt phytoplasma. We also have detected that here in Oklahoma as well as in Texas. And then we have maize rhyetophenovirus, which we have not detected in Oklahoma, but Texas has. The important thing to note about these two viruses is that you're not going to find those independently. Those are going to be something that are additive to the bacteria ones that we have. So one other important thing that I want y'all to remember moving into future years with if we have this pathosystem or not, is that it takes time for this insect to be able to acquire the pathogen, have that pathogen be able to build up in an amount where they can transmit it and cause an infection in a plant. It's then going to take a lot of time, days to weeks, for it then to start to show symptomology in the corn plant. And then you're going to see the symptomology, and then you're going to panic, and then there's nothing that you can do, unfortunately, because there's no curative strategy for corn stunt. So we want to be sure we're able to identify those leafhoppers and respond appropriately. So one thing I know from having conversations with several people this last year was in July, I was getting reports of, oh, I really don't think it's going to be that bad. I haven't seen anything. We didn't see anything until 2024, until about August. So we were kind of jumping the gun on that for whenever we saw it before. So kind of keep in mind what these patterns are. Patterns can change when we see possible infection depending on when the insect arrives. So that's one thing we need to take into consideration too. But based on when we've seen this insect arising in the past, here in Oklahoma, it's usually been towards the end of June, beginning of July. So you're not going to see symptomology immediately in July because it takes a couple to a few weeks for it to show up. So these pictures here are from my colleague, Dr. Mayura Dufek. She's our row crop pathologist. So in working with this system as an entomologist, I also need a pathologist to help me with these different components. So these pictures are all from Oklahoma that she took. So just a reminder of what we're talking about with corn stunt. We have the reddening of the leaf tips. Just remember that this is not only an indicator of corn stunt, this is an indicator of lots of other things like nutrient deficiency, drought stress, and other kinds of issues. We also saw shortening of internodes, and this is why we actually get that term corn stunting. So those internodes are shortened between where the leaves are coming out. We also saw this kind of stay green effect. So this zombie corn is kind of how people refer to it. It basically means that while most of the field is senescing, a lot of those plants that are infected with the corn stunt spiroplasma or other pathogens associated with corn stunt actually don't dry down. So you look across and you've kind of got this little bit of random green plants that just won't seem to senesce for you. We also saw chlorotic streaks. So these chlorosis, that also is something else that can be caused by a lot of different kinds of environmental impacts and different factors. But this was predominantly something that we saw in a lot of our sweet corn. When we saw this in our field corn, it was really a combination of chlorotic streaks that also had some of the reddening mixed into it too. And we saw missing or light kernels. And so very easy, or if you picked that ear off of the plant, then those kernels started to shatter off. And I think that's a pretty cool mechanism. As a scientist, I say this, because that's actually a way that this pathosystem has been able to figure out how it needs to continue to persist. Those shoot off, create volunteer corn, serving as a reservoir then for the pathogens and also for the insect to be able to reproduce. And we also saw a difference in kernel size for our healthy plants versus our infected. And the reason Mayura has healthy in this portion right here is because, to be honest, infection probably occurred. These are both actually from the same field. Infection of this healthy plant probably happened at a later stage than whenever we had this infected plant with the smaller kernels. And so since it was at a later growth stage, the impact on the symptomology that could produce problems for yield was a lot less. We also saw things like proliferation of multiple ears, which at first you might think that's great, we're getting more corn off of this. However, none of these actually start to develop kernels, and so it's just the plant trying to figure out how it's able to actually grow ears, but can't have the resources and ability to be able to do so. So one thing I want to stress, this is really, really important when I'm talking to my crop consultants, is that you cannot go into a field, see these symptoms and say that's corn stunt. You have to do molecular testing on the leaf tissue or on the leaves or on the stalk of the plant. That's the only way we can confirm those pathogens are there and that it's not some other kind of environmental factor or deficiency that's causing the symptomology. So please be sure to be taking those samples, share them with Mayura, share them with myself, share them with Jen at the Plant Disease and Insect Diagnostic Lab. That way we can actually document and correctly confirm that we do have it in the state. All right, so looking back at 2024, lessons learned, things we can pick up on moving forward. Looking back on this, in 2024, in April, we started to see reports from countries to the south of Mexico, Argentina and Brazil, talking about really severe outbreaks of corn stunt or some sort of corn disease. And then we started to see, coming out of the coastal bend of Texas, my colleague here, Stephen Biles, started to note that they had populations of corn poppers there in Victoria. And then in 2024, we started to receive samples after we first noticed that corn stunt was present. So Oklahoma State noticed it in July 31st and talking to colleagues with Bayer, so really appreciative of that. One of the agronomists, Steve Carlson, started to share information with me of saying, hey, this is when we actually located and found it, was going to be towards the end of June. So kind of doing some backtracking, we were able to figure out, based on symptomology, when we started to see this disease, likely entered at the end of June in 2024. Maira and also our diagnostic lab confirmed that we had corn stunt spiroplasma, maize bushy stunt phytoplasma, and both of those pathogens in combination in some of the tissue that they were testing. And I talked to different producers, and I have evidence based on yields that they were able to share with me in historic data, where we had yield losses anywhere between 10 to 55%, and that is not just exclusive to only our double crop corn, but also to our full season corn. 2024, we had a very high population of corn leafhoppers, as well as a very active presence of different pathogens and a high pathogen load out in the environment. Going into 2025, we didn't observe any corn leafhoppers after we had that long period of time of actual freezes in December and January. Texas also didn't report any documentation of having corn leafhopper until February 2025 down in South Texas. So Danielle Sakula is located there at the Weslaco Research Station with Texas A&M AgriLife. And what Danielle observed, and based on conversations I'm having with David Kearns, they seem to have a population that was able to survive on volunteer corn that was down at this location. It was very mild. Volunteer corn was not taken care of by Mother Nature. Growers usually don't manage it, and so we had a reservoir for reproduction and also for those pathogens to continue to contribute. Over 2025, we saw that we were on trend for having similar weather patterns to what we saw in 2024, preparing us to anticipate having the corn leafhopper move northward again. So we confirmed the corn leafhopper here in Oklahoma, again through collaborations with our industry partners, so individuals at Bayer specifically on this one. They were able to help us recognize that they had the corn leafhopper in Choctaw County, so right at the Red River, and able to see that, we do have signs of the corn leafhopper, but we didn't yet have symptomology there. So we knew the insect was there, but it took about 2-3 weeks before symptomology was observed. We see also that this year, reports that I have preliminarily, and if you have more data about this, please come talk to me. I'd like to have more information for this puzzle. We saw that we had really low concerns in terms of impact on yield this year. I have some reports for double crop corn that maybe we had about 30% kind of yield loss associated with this, but I'm unsure also that person did not tell me if they actually tested for and confirmed corn stunt in those samples. So that's again why this testing is so important. This year, though, what I can say is that we had very low populations of corn leafhopper and low pathogen incidence relative to the previous year based on data from Dr. Dufek's lab and also from Plant Disease and Insect Diagnostic Laboratory. So please be sure in the future, if you see the symptomology, to confirm it with testing. So Maira led the charge in having a working group, and so we are working with colleagues at 13 different land grant institutions across the U.S., primarily through the Southern Plains and over into Southeast U.S. And so people were documenting and logging when they were finding corn leafhopper samples that they confirmed as Dabulus matus. So I'm going to share this resource that y'all can access in the future to be able to look at trending maps should we have corn leafhopper again. So we see that it did make a pretty good spread. I was just in Iowa last week talking about the corn leafhopper there because they are worried about it. And they actually were able to tell me that they detected corn leafhopper and confirmed it at the beginning of August. So they're going to be updating their maps soon. And then what we also see is that we did again have corn stunt spiroplasma, and we also had some maize bushy stunt phytoplasma. But again, different frequency for both the pest and also the pathogens. So the biggest question that I've had and some conversations that I had also, so last week I was in Iowa, but I started it in Texas for a corn leafhopper summit that Texas A&M hosted. Went down there, we talked about what are some things we need to consider moving forward and sharing management strategies for the future. And I got asked this question and I was like, this is a setup that I had to kind of like look in the crystal ball and predict it. We really have a lot to learn, but what we can say in talking, that was a group of consultants, as well as also academics, as well as also industry people that we sat in the room and we talked about it. And the big question we really have is, when is the corn getting infected? And how long do we have to protect that corn to make it through the growth stages? And I'm going to talk more about that here in just a moment. But we have a lot to learn. Really, it's going to be dependent upon that growth stage at the time of infection, whether we're going to be able to outrun it, or if there's going to be symptomology that's going to be seen, and if that symptomology is actually going to have an impact on yield. So, 2024, we had warnings that were coming out from the south of us. We didn't have any of those alarming stories in 2025, which should have clued us in to say, okay, we didn't really, we weren't possibly going to be anticipating as high of a pathogen load at that time. And we have a recurring history in Texas, California, and Florida. So one big question is, was it overlooked in other states? Louisiana did not report it in 2024. They reported it in 2025, though. Symptomology is very similar to other things. And we do know that in 2023, we have samples of the corn leafhopper that were collected out of a suction trap network, which starts in Kansas and moves beyond up into the Great Plains. So there's probably times where we've missed this, but what we genuinely think this is going to be a primary issue for is the states where it's usually reoccurring. So Texas, California, and Florida. And we also do have concerns not only for Texas, but also for Oklahoma as well, moving into Kansas. Beyond that, whenever I was talking to individuals in Iowa, concerns that we had there, I think, are diminished because by the time the insects have arrived, their corn is at dent or at dough. So really, the crop has already made its decision in what it's going to do in terms of yield. So at that point, the growth and the amount of time it takes in for the symptomology to take hold, it's going to outpace what the symptomology could actually do to impact yield. So some things you can do moving into this next season, and some of y'all have actually tried a few of these things and had similar grumblings that I did about some of these. So it's kind of a pick your best option of what you're actually going to implement and do. But a vacuum is one option. So you can take a leaf vacuum. Yes, they make those, not just leaf blowers, but leaf vacuums. You then modify it with a pair of thigh highs. I have a very good colleague that can now tell me what's the best preferred brand to use. If you want to know, I'm happy to share. You can order them on Amazon. So if you don't want to go pick them out at Walmart, you don't have to. But you can get them on Amazon. No one will ever know that you ordered them. But you're going to place them where you're going to have that elastic band around the edge of the tube. You're going to invert that thigh high down into the tube itself, and then you turn on the vacuum. You're able to go around, sample multiple sections of a field, multiple plants. This is really helpful for whenever you have that early vegetative stages of corn. And then you're going to tie off the thigh high, toss it into the freezer for a good while, and then check through it for those corn leaf hoppers. So that's one option. Another option that I have found has been this handheld car vacuum. That's one tool that you can use, and you can then check the cylinder to see, are you sucking up corn leaf hoppers? This detaches. You can also place it into a freezer. One problem, though, I will say actually with this method is that for residue, it does pick up a lot of trash. Okay, so I found that to be very frustrating to use whenever I was trying to check my double crop corn. So that's one limitation to that method. Another method, yellow sticky traps. This insect is documented to be attracted to yellow. It will go to that color, so that is why they are used. Also, think about the capability of what you're actually going to do. So this is a good check that you can do within a week. This is going to be something, though, that is heavy, limited on battery power as well, too. So think about that. Or are you more the kind of person that's going to go out and check a sticky trap? That should be at the height or the canopy of the corn itself. However, with this, the concern is that it can be hard to pull samples off of here. Also, you're asking a very small insect to land on a small piece of paper that is a very large field, so you could possibly miss. So there's no substitute for active good monitoring and scouting if you want to actually find the insect and possibly have lowered risk of corn stunt in the future. So limitations to each method, what's going to work best for you. And then, of course, there's always the good old sweep net that you can use as well. So this is good up to a point, depending on how tall you are, or if you're like me, not so tall after all, of the height of the corn at which you can sweep. But basically, you're going to want to knock the tops of the plants to be able to collect the insect inside of it as you're sweeping back and forth. Later stages, whenever you get to that taller corn, so that's also a limitation for vacuum. You can't really, I don't have the upper body strength to hold one of those like suction vacs up and not damage the corn and suck them up. But you could sweep net up the side of a corn plant and down really quickly to be able to sample and collect the insects as well. So In terms of integrated pest management and guidance that we are deciding to move forward and present kind of as a cohort between Texas, Oklahoma, and Kansas for us entomologists is to, it'd be nice to plant resistant corn hybrids, but those don't exactly exist on the US market, okay? So right now, I think what we have at best is anecdotal information. Some of you industry people might be annoyed with me for saying that, but we have observations. We don't yet have scientific evidence of how these perform in the US. I know some are sending off germplasm to be tested at some locations where we have endemic populations outside of the US, but it doesn't seem like they're holding up all that well compared to what we see in locations like Argentina, Brazil, and Mexico. So we need to also manage our volunteer corn, which I think for us in Oklahoma is going to be taken care of by Mother Nature. So that's really promising. But think about how weather patterns change. If we don't get one of those freezes, and we do have populations of volunteer corn, you're leaving a place to build up the population of the insect and also the reservoir for the pathogens too. So just know that, we can sometimes have a pretty warm time. What I will also say about this is, in talking to some producers, this was in, I believe this was in Shawnee, as where I was at actually for this. There were some soft freezes or soft frost events that happened. The producer was like, oh no, I bet they won't be in there. They were still in there when the plant was still green, okay? So they're pretty resilient. Getting in that world provides them some protection from the ambient temperature, which is different from the temperature they're actually experiencing. It wasn't until we actually had complete die down of volunteer corn that we started to see the populations of corn leafhopper crash last year. And then also plant early. Now, if you're a double crop guy, kind of silly to tell you that, right? But if you're a double crop guy, pay attention to what's going on, coming out south from you. That would be a really good indicator of maybe what you should or should not do. But really planting early is a way to beat the corn leafhopper populations from building and arriving. So what we've typically seen in Oklahoma is they've arrived towards the end of June, so full season. Hopefully you can get a little bit of time on there for that. But again, we understand there's limitations when it comes to what you can do because of weather conditions allowing you to plant and when you can plant. The other thing that David Kern tested out at Texas A&M is he looked at some insecticide seed treatments. And so I think this is going to be very critical for our double crop corn people. This might be something interesting that you want to take into account. But what he found is that with our 1250 rates, you should have protection up through the V5 stage from the corn leafhopper, but after that, if you do have populations of them present, you're probably going to need to consider some foliar applications. And I'll talk about foliar insecticide recommendations in a moment. 500 seed treatments provide protection up until about V3 based on his trials that he did. So last year, when we had this talk, I shared a slide very similar to this. We were suggesting both Texas, Oklahoma, and other locations to protect corn through V8. And that was based on recommendations out of Brazil and also out of Argentina. The reason we gave those recommendations is because that's where they were working, but it was, again, working on the hybrids they have available in their markets, which we don't have available here. So the big question we have, which we're trying to figure out and hope that industry can help us answer, is protect through tassel, R1 or R2. And then once you get it to that stage, then it's going to take again that time for those pathogens to go ahead and have an impact on symptomology, which can impact yield. So that's just one thing that we need to take into account is we're still figuring this out. It's still our best guess, okay? There's no economic threshold. Really, IPM is not just spraying when you see a bug. So we don't want to lend to resistance, which we are seeing resistance of this pest in outside of the country to different types of insecticides, and we don't want to bring that issue here. So pay attention really to what's happening in other countries that are growing corn where you have regular populations of the pest to help inform us what we need to do moving into the future for our protection and if it's going to be a big major issue. So this last year, I did some insecticide trials here in Stillwater. When I did these trials, I planted double crops, so it was a true double crop scenario. I could not have done this without the key people here at the bottom of the slide, so I just want to acknowledge Dr. Lofton, his crew, Roy Grant, and also Ted Newell, because without them, my crew would not been able to do any of this. But we planted our plots 10 by 40 feet, 4 rows, 30-inch spacing. I planted them July 11th because I wanted to be sure I had a population of corn leafhoppers that were going to be present. So they were in a couple cornfields that were on the same research station that I was located at. In furrow, I planted I applied 3 different rates of Savanto. I'll show that to you in a moment. Foliar treatments, I had 11. Sprayed those on my birthday, so that was kind of fun. And then we used a backpack sprayer for that, and we put out 10 gallons per acre, which I think is still a little high for what some of our guys actually do. And then we sampled whole plants. So we focused primarily on the nymphs. My reason for this is adults, they're going to be darting, moving in and out. Getting a count of an adult that is highly mobile is not going to be very informative, but instead seeing if reproduction slows, stops, or is possibly increased based on the insecticide treatment, is going to be more useful. So here is what I tested. It's a very large table. In furrow, again, I did 3 different rates of Savanto, 8, 10, and 12 ounces. Foliar applications you see here. I want to mention that I have planazoline listed. It has since been labeled. It is now called Vertento. That is a Syngenta product. It is a new mode of action, or a new also active ingredient, the isocycloserum. But I also tested Savanto foliarly, Steward at 8 and 10 ounces, Besiege, Indigo, Warrior 2, Brigade, Hero, and then dimethoate in combination with Mustang Max. So thank you to all of my industry partners that help provide product for us to be able to do this test. And also financial support. That's very much appreciated. So here's my in-furrow data. What we have is the days after emergence. I also have further data that goes on beyond this, but overall the trend was the same. There was no significant difference between my control and my in-furrow treatments. So Savanto is not labeled for in-furrow application in corn or for the corn leaf hopper. So the purpose that we were trying to do this was to see if we should ask for a label extension. There's no reason for us to justify that. This results are very similar to what we saw at Texas trials, Kansas trials, and also out of Missouri trials too. Now, when it comes to foliar, I'm going to show this a little different way than how you see a lot of the other graphs. I'm going to show it as this kind of report card, and I'm using the term report card very loosely. But what I want to point out is that I kind of have this grade scale, green for A grade. So if we saw that there was suppression, again, saying suppression, not control, because there was usually some presence of nymphs there. But suppression of nymphs. So green is going to be anything that performed at 90% or better suppression. Blue is going to be between 80 to 89% suppression of nymphs. Yellow is going to be the C grade, 70, 79. And then orange for D grade, 60 to 69%. And then black for an F grade. What I've got here, you can kind of notice these trends as some of them are declining, increasing. We did see that for a number of our treatments that when we went into 7 days after treatment, that we did see efficacy actually improve. However, we saw it really trail off after 14 days after treatment, and that's very similar to what we saw for a number of these compounds whenever they were tested in Texas and also in Missouri. So looking at this data in kind of a different way, if we look at in combination how these performed, their mean performance basically for the number or percent nymph reduction at a combination of 3, 7, and 14 days after treatment, this is how they kind of shook out. So we've got ours that performed with basically a C grade or better. Again, I'm going to explain why I'm using this term loosely here in a moment. We've got ours that kind of did a D grade or better. And then we've also got those that just failed. And so what I can actually absolutely say is please do not use any of these products. A lot of them are going to be less expensive, but efficacy of these is nil to none whenever we looked at this, not only here in Stillwater, but also in other locations around the US. So the big question is, what is an A+ insecticide? Really, that's going to be dependent upon how many plants can an infected corn leafhopper go and feed on and transmit those symptoms to. Even though I'm saying it's an A+ because it had 90% better suppression, doesn't mean that it's actually going to give you that actual percent reduction in transmission of what's going to cause it. You're going to be minimizing risk to some degree, but I can't necessarily say it's an A+ level pesticide, okay? So there's some limitations to this. We may be requiring multiple treatments in a season, so continue to scout. That's going to be very important. I think once you get to that R1, R2 stage, hopefully, then at that point, you don't need to apply any more applications moving forward, but more information is needed to be able to make that soundly. Other thing I want y'all to be aware of is that if you spray a non-ionic surfactant product in a pre-tassel stage of corn, you can get arrested ear development. These symptoms kind of look like some corn stunt symptoms. Again, you'd only know if you tested the leaf tissue for symptomatic plants, so be aware of that. Concerns for resistance, please don't go with the cheapest option. Not only is it not effective, but you can also flare up spider mite populations. Again, these also weren't effective in trials that we have from the US. Don't go broad spectrum. I am observing that there's parasitoid activity out there that is acting upon these corn leaf hoppers. I'm also observing that there are larvae of lady beetles that are feeding on them too, as well as syrphid larvae and even spiders. So be sure that you pick something that's a little more on the softer side to help allow those free insects that are going to provide some sort of conservation control for you out there. So prepping for 2026, stay aware of what's happening in the south of us. So I'm going to share some resources for you of how you can stay in tune with that. High insecticide seed treatment may be more important for double crop than I think for our full season based on when we've seen time of arrival and how they progress and move through Texas. Actively scout and increase the frequency as reports come from the south, and don't let your guard down. Understand that these populations and pathogens vary year to year. You saw that timeline that I gave you of the previous outbreaks. Do not be surprised if in 2026 we do not see the corn leaf hopper and we do not see corn stunt disease. But please don't be a chicken with your head cut off running around in the future when we do see it again and you don't know what to do. Remember everything I have taught you, okay? If you don't remember, come find me so I can please gently remind you. Also, have your insecticide on hand. So ones that we're finding that are working well based on trials, not only of my own, but also my colleagues. Savanto Prime at that 7 fluid ounce rate, Stewart at the 8 ounce rate or 10 ounce rate, and also Indigo. And then be sure to follow best practices for delivery of this. So things are going to possibly change, especially as we get more guidance and as we learn more through the research that we're doing. So just be sure to stay tuned on what's happening. So if you're interested in how to receive updates, not only from myself, but also out of Texas, I'd strongly encourage you to scan this QR code. I'm going to be working with David on putting out a bulletin for Oklahoma and also for Texas on these management strategies. We're going to be working on that in the near coming future so we can have them into a format that you can then share and then reference as well. So I'm excited about that joint effort there too. But I just want to say big thanks to everyone that helped make this trial possible. I think it was really informative and useful. So I'm going to go ahead and jump into another leaf hopper that we don't yet have here in Oklahoma, but we are getting a lot of questions about. And so also Max is here too. And so he's had to talk about it briefly last week, I want to say, at the online CEUs. But the slides I'm sharing with you today actually come from one of my really good friends from grad school, who now knows the curse of a leaf hopper. And so this is Dr. Isaac Esquivel. He's located at UF. He's in the Florida Panhandle at the Quincy Research Station. He's the one that actually first verified that it was there in Florida in cotton. And then we have Dr. Philip Roberts, a well-seasoned cotton and soybean entomologist out of Georgia. Dr. Jeremy Green, who's with Clemson, and then Dr. Scott Graham, who's one of mine and Isaac's colleagues there at Auburn. So again, all of the slides that I have here are going to be coming from Isaac, but I'm going to share some of the data that all these guys pitched into for their insecticide trials. So briefly, the 2-spot cotton leaf hopper, that is the name that they have put forward for Entomological Society of America. So this is the common name we're going to go with. You can also call it the cotton jazzid. And so it's kind of funny. Some of the guys, whenever they sent out a text, started to say jazzid. And it was just very ironic and kind of goofy. But what I will say about this is that some people were saying that jazzid was an old word out of India for the leaf hopper. That's not the case. Jazzid referred to a group of insects that were leaf hoppers. It's an old term that we used entomologically, and that's where it comes from. So they're native to the Indian subcontinent, east to Japan and Micronesia. Originally, they were first found in Puerto Rico in 2023, outside of India. So it's one of their first incidents outside that location. And then in Florida, they were found in 2024 and then confirmed again in 2025. And so when they were found in 2024, it was not on cotton, but it was other plants. And I'll share what some of those are in just a moment. So earlier this year, Isaac detected it just before the 4th of July in Gilchrist County. So located up here towards the Panhandle part of Florida. And then 4 weeks later, they were able to confirm it in about 115 southeast Mississippi, southeast counties in the southeast. Sorry, in the southeast that we're talking about is this region in here. So this is a map from the end of August. It has since expanded. So they also confirmed it in Mississippi and North Carolina as of September 8th. Now, when we're talking about this leaf hopper, it is even smaller than the corn leaf hopper. I know that some of y'all are probably really excited about that. So they're very, 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 very small. And to emphasize how small they are, you can see them on this dime right here. So they are very small leaf hoppers. Their characteristics are going to be more dots. So dots between the eyes, but these can fade over time. But really the ones that should clue you in, because it's a differentiating characteristic from other leafhoppers we have in the US, are going to be these two spots that are going to be on their wings. As the nymphs start to develop, you'll start to see two small dots developing on their wing pads. You'll notice that on those later stages of the nymphs. All right, so nymphs can move pretty quickly. They're going to crab walk, so they're pretty fast. Where you might find them, it really is going to be a lot of those malvaceous plants. If you're thinking about a malvaceous plant, you're thinking about something that's going to have this kind of cone formation here. Okay, so cotton has this, makes sense. Okra has this, and then also Turk's cap has this. And so Turk's cap is something that I actually see quite a bit because it's something that is popular to put into landscapes as a native plant. Is also a sufficient host for the cotton jacid. So eggplant, Caesar weed are also where they're found. Okra is another one for them, and then ornamental hibiscus. Now it's important that I mention this, and the way that these have kind of moved around to other locations. For example, they moved into Texas in this way, was through movement of big box stores. So we start to get a lot of these plants into different nurseries, some of these being things like larger retail centers. And then Isaac was actually going out in Florida and he was able to find them on different plants that he was finding from these big box stores. That's also what Texas started to notice. And so they were starting to have people go out, buy those plants so they could start a colony for research purposes. So this is something that has major implications, not only just for our cotton, but is also a concern that Kenny Naylor and ODAF are also working on too. So this is something that you see. Please communicate this with us so that appropriate response can be given. All right, so cotton jacid biology. For our life history, the females, they're also going to lay their eggs in plant tissue, just like a lot of other leafhoppers. Eggs take about 3 to 4 days to hatch. Nymphs, they also have 5 instars, like our corn leaf hopper. And then the adults can live anywhere between 2 to 4 more weeks, and they can have a new generation about every 2 weeks. Again, very temperature dependent and also humidity driven too. So with this, again, you're looking at a green insect that is also going to be against a green background, so it can be hard to find them. But from what Isaac has observed is they're going to be strongly along these mid veins, and that's going to be where you can locate them usually. Now with this, a lot of the times when they were first seeing that there was some sort of injury, people were assuming that that damage was due to mites. And so we're kind of blowing it off. But then that injury would progress so fast to where they realize it's not mites, it's some other kind of infestation or issue that we're having. So what we see is going to be early discoloration, this yellowing of the leaf edges that we see here. It gets a little bit darker and moves a little bit more inward then towards those veins. You then eventually start to see what they're calling hopper burn, okay? So you get this dark coloring in red leaf. You also can get cupping, upward cupping of the leaves as well. And then basically, he said that they saw slight discoloration, and then over the weekend, it essentially went from slight discoloration, something like this, to seeing more damage, that cupping of the leaf, the changing in the colors, and then also starting to see that hopper burn around the edges of the leaves too. They're not really sure yet about yield effects. The thing about this is whenever there's a lot of questions that they can't yet answer because they haven't been able to time when infestation happens at different growth stages. This is the stage at which they were able to find the infestation on the cotton. This trial was actually something Isaac and I were going to do related to stink bugs. And he said, hey, I can't do that project with you anymore. I'm going to have to turn this into an insecticide trial. So that's whenever he started to do his insecticide treatments. So plants can go downhill pretty quickly. It will defoliate the plants, which at first you think, oh, that's nice. It does it for you. You just get all of that trash directly into whenever you're starting to harvest your cotton. So it's really not a great thing. So with this, what they're suggesting right now, and again, this is probably going to change as they get more information, is that you should count the jacid nymphs on the undersides of individual main stem leaves in the top 6 inches of that canopy, okay? So they're saying to sample 1 leaf per acre or a minimum of 25, whichever is greater. And then basically, when they're looking for these, you're looking for the nymphs, but also the adults. But the nymphs are what's telling you that that population is really kicking off and it's going to start another generation. So preliminary threshold, what they're saying is 1 nymph per leaf and having that symptomology present. And don't confuse it with aphids. That's where I really encourage you, please have a good hand lens on you, especially because we're talking about a pest that is a lot smaller. So populations are going to take off pretty quickly, similar to whiteflies, which to us in Oklahoma doesn't really mean much in terms of agronomic crops. It's not like the Southeast where they have major problems with whiteflies. For us, I think that's one benefit, because what they are finding is that whenever they are doing sprays, they're kicking off whitefly populations. And so then they're having to combat another pest right behind it because they've knocked out the beneficials that usually take care of those whiteflies. So other places you can scout for this are going to be, they said corn, soybean, peanut, okra, sunflowers, eggplant, potato, peas, and potentially other hosts based on what has been found in the literature so far. So I'm going to share some of these with you. Right now, what I can tell you that they're really pushing for in terms of use of insecticides is going to be centric. And so whenever we had our Cotton States meeting earlier this year, they shared a lot of information with us, and we said, what are you going for based off of cost and also return on what you're seeing? This is also talking about cotton production in the Southeast, which, as we know, is very different from cotton production here in Oklahoma, okay? So what the Southeast is pushing for right now is with this centric. And so we have our untreated control over here, just for how you read this graph. And then we have the label name, the trade name, as well as the rate at which they applied it. And then we start to see the percent mortality, which is 4 days after application, okay? Sometimes, as we know, it takes a little bit longer for these to kind of kick in and actually show true suppression, depending on what that active ingredient is and its mode of action. So here again is some examples of some pictures where when they didn't treat, or if they treated too late, they had evidence of basically increased populations, lending to a lot of that damage. And then here you see plants that have that defoliation, and also the cotton bolls there on the ground too. So pretty damaging and devastating. All right, so some other efficacy data. What they did here is just comparing Exaril to carbine, where they saw, greater suppression at 72%, and then even more so 7 days after treatment versus 3 days after treatment. And then also what they looked at is for the trial that he had planted for our stink bug stuff, he just compared two varieties. There was no difference between the two varieties he did. Again, this is not an experiment that was set up with the intent of this insect, so there's some sort of limitations we can use in interpretations. But so far from what those guys are seeing, there's no difference between varieties that we've got, at least in those locations. So here's some combined data that those four guys put together based on the trials they did in their different states respectively. Some of them have greater numbers of trial evidence here. So we see some were able to replicate this in 2 versus in 4 trials. That's what that N number means, is how many different locations these were tested at. And then a similar kind of breakdown of a C or greater in terms of suppression on how these did over, again, the 14-day treatment. They also saw that efficacy seemed to wear off and populations started to rebound after that time frame. Then we've got our group here that were kind of the middle of the road, and then we've got some down here that we just they just would not suggest at this time. And then here's one data point. I believe that this is also from one of the trials, which they had a little more coordinated, looking at how the performance of these different insecticides were. So if you're interested in more cotton jasted resources, they just had on Cotton Specialist Corner, Isaac and I believe either Philip or Scott did a podcast. So I've got a link to that on here. I've got a link to another podcast that they did. I've also got the bulletin that both Auburn and also Florida have put out for this. And then also I've got something that I want to share with y'all from Texas A&M for where they're going to be looking at stuff too. I'll show that on the next slide. But here, if you see it, share this with Jenny, Maxwell, myself, so we can verify the identification. And then also we need to be sharing this information with Kenny and ODAP as well, so that they can go ahead and share that on a statewide response side. And then here is how Texas A&M is going to be sharing. So if you signed up for this last year, you need to use this new link. David said they kind of maxed out their abilities and they were going to be sent to a higher payload. So they're going to be dividing these up, not sending information about the JACID to both people that want cotton leafhopper and corn leafhopper information. Now they're kind of dividing it up. So take a picture of this slide so that you can sign up for those text messages whenever they're getting reports out of there. Last shameless plug, Do you have chinch bugs? Have you had a history of chinch bugs in your sorghum? If so, please come talk to me. I have opportunities for 2 trials this next coming year, and I've got a graduate student that will be working on this, and I would really like to, and Dr. Lofton has provided information and shared with me, and I'm dragging him along with me on this journey at his urging of putting me on this journey is what I will say. But I would like to explore this, look at some IPM efforts, and I've got some funding potentially from the National Sorghum Growers, and then also one that I will be doing that is a regional project as an IR4 project with a group of different states. And so if y'all have a connection that would be willing to let me do an IPM trial on there, I'd be glad to talk to them. And with that, I'm going to go ahead, share my contact info, and hand it off to somebody else because I know I've talked too long. Okay. Yes, Kenny.
Yeah, Ashley, this is more of a plug since you asked them to look for cotton jassid.
Yes.
There are 2 other insects I would like for y'all to look for too that are coming. One is the cottonseed bug. It has established itself in California, and so that's where all major seed production is. So please be on the lookout for it. The other they just found in Texas called the pasture mealy moth. Pasture mealybug, and please keep your eye out for it as well. Both of them have very detrimental effects to their crops.
Yeah, so pasture mealybug, I know that's a hot topic. If you're coming to the entomology winter in-service, then I will be talking about it there with Kelly. We'll be sharing some information out of Texas. It has been found at around the Dallas area, but also in talking to my Texas colleagues, that doesn't mean that they have inspected every single place it could possibly be. When people ask what symptomology is, dead. That's basically the symptomology I can tell you. So don't excuse things. I think we're learning. Don't excuse things for nutrient deficiencies, drought, other kind of stuff. Do some investigation to confirm it's not some other kind of issue in there too. Yes, Matt.
You said something about this cotton jassid can host on peanuts. In the Southeast, did they see any problems there?
Not evidence so far of problems with it. And so I also want to stress this is not a pathogen they're transmitting. This is a toxin that they're exuding. So it's got to be enzymatic activity that is happening that is causing these plants to defoliate and have these severe symptomology. So there's not evidence of it. Soybean people are freaking out. There's no evidence of damage yet to soybeans either. They're just in that area. So don't know if it's a plant defense or is something else that's happening that is, or if they're just not injecting that. We don't know just yet. Yeah. Yes. Anybody else? In the back. That is just a system that it just managed to develop. It just recognized. So there are spiroplasmas. There are those types of pathogens that occur in all sorts of insect orders. So this insect, the cornleaf hopper, is one that has a close association with the pathogen. At first, it was on teosinte or teosinte, and then as we domesticated corn, it moved into traditional maize that we know, or maize as we know it now, commercialized maize. And it just realized that they had a really great synergistic host to it. So there is a lot of evolutionary biology that is linked and based to that as to why it is that way. They know they need each other. The insect itself is not negatively impacted by that pathogen. It knows it needs that plant to reproduce in it, and that pathogen knows it needs the insect and the plant to be able to persist out in Mother Nature. So we would need to do a lot of digging into the literature and really talking about some heavy evolutionary biology terms to help give a good explanation for it. Yeah, but it's interesting. Yes. Yes.
Do we know where all these new insects are morphing from? What's causing this?
So some of it is going to be weather patterns, okay? So some of it is weather patterns. If we also think about it, we're changing our agronomic practices and we're changing when we plant. So we're building, in some cases, green bridges. What we also think, and Kenny, you can back me up on this in terms of the cotton jassid, it's, we're exporting, importing, moving things around and where they're coming from. And sometimes I don't think it's necessarily that people aren't doing their due diligence. I think they don't know to do their due diligence because they don't know about all the threats that are potentially out there. So I think it's a combination of those things of where are we getting things from? Where are those things that we need coming from in terms of imports? And then also, what is Mother Nature just bringing to us as we have changing weather conditions and weather patterns happening? Yes, so the cotton jassid is from India. That is where it is from. And so the other interesting thing to think about is biologically, the cotton jassid luckily doesn't survive off of dead plants, but it has a number of other hosts that it can go into to survive. The thing about the cotton seed bug that is scary is that can come in whenever you're selling, moving, trading seed, it can come in with that. So it's kind of like a stored product pest. It's like if I could make that loose connection to it of how things could potentially get moved around. How do you feel about that explanation, Kenny?
Thank you. Y'all can probably hear me better now. No, it does get into the bowl. That's where you should be looking at. It destroys the seed. That's what it's working on, but it also discolors the lint. It is a worldwide pest that has not been in the U.S. It came into Florida. They eradicated it. Then it showed up in Los Angeles area in California. California did not eradicate it. Now it's expanded to like 5 counties out there. None of them are in the cottonseed growing area yet, but they are close. So that's why I say it's very important to watch. One thing I would say is the Custom and Border Protection and USDA both watch very carefully on everything that's coming in, but there are things that make their way through. California had 7 new introductions of fruit flies in the last couple of years, and all of that's with them watching very heavily. They even know where it came from, and they're still trying to find the cargoes and what pathways it's coming in.
Forefront of the corn leafhopper stuff with us too, and did a lot of testing. So this is Jen Olson. She is our director for our plant disease and insect diagnostic laboratory, and she is a full-fledged extension specialist. So I'm going to go ahead and let Jen talk about don't get caught with your plants down. So
I think I have one here.
okay.
I don't know how to turn that off for now. Okay, can you hear me? All right. Well, thank you for having me today. Sometimes, I had to kill a tree just so I could remind Dr. Arnall exactly what he asked me to do back in July, because that's a long time ago. Yeah, you're on this email. Wait. Oh, you can't hear me. Now? I can hold it. Okay. Sorry about that. So I printed out this email because this is what he said. Jen, I was hoping for you to share the process of the lab, maybe focus on viral and some things you see. You're really free range on whatever you want. And Max, in case you want to change your talk in the next half hour, I'm open for anything you want. So this is what you asked for. I will try to deliver. And so my name is Jen Olson, and I'm the director of the Plant Disease and Insect Diagnostic Lab. Some of you visited the both soil testing lab and our lab this morning. What we do is we provide accurate identification of plant diseases and arthropods. So you go out to a field, you think you know what it is, you use your Google AI to verify it. Don't trust that. Both Nicole and I can tell you it's very often wrong, but sometimes it is easy to ID problems, stripe rust, leaf rust, things like that. But when you're not sure, that is what we are here for. Or anytime you think you're seeing something new, different, something that has changed, it is helpful to submit a sample with us. This is my team. So we have Sarah and myself, who are both plant pathologists. And so we look at the plant pathogens. Nicole is our insect diagnostician. One nice thing about our team is that we're pretty much always there. Whereas someone like Dr. Ferris, she's often out in the field. She was in Iowa, she was in Malaysia. We're usually there so that if you are trying to get a little bit more immediate feedback, we're there to answer the phone. I'll give you all the contact info shortly. Katie is probably, if you give us a call, the person that is going to answer the phone. She'll be the first person who contacts you about our sample. She's our lab technician. So we are the specialists in identification and diagnosis. And very often, mainly for this audience, usually we're going to be referring you to an extension specialist for those management recommendations, although I am going to put some in here today. So I kind of had free range and I didn't know what to talk about, but we are starting to see some wheat samples, and my husband works for Dr. Aoun, our wheat plant pathologist. So I have lots of wheat pictures and wheat experience. I thought we'd go there. So I want to tell you about a recent sample and then talk about specifically what we do in the lab to test for viruses to identify those leaf spot and root rot fungi. So this is kind of a typical thing we see this time of year. There's not a lot that's green out there right now with crops, but you could probably find some wheat that looks like this. By my pointer, here's a typical picture I get. This wheat that is on the left is a little bit yellow. Wheat that's more on the right, a little bit greener. I like getting lots of pictures from the field. I have an easy email address. It's sickplants@okstate.edu. And Nicole, her email is gotbugs@okstate.edu. So easy to get in touch with us. We get pictures like this. This wheat doesn't look great. It's got some yellowing, got maybe some purpling or browning. So what is going on? So the first thing we're going to say, bring us a sample. So a sample is a small representation of what you're seeing. If you have something good and not good, that's helpful too. This is the kind of thing that they brought into us. So I'm not going to name who brought this in, but they might be in the room. And so if it's just a foliar problem, they were really concerned that this might be a virus, that this might be barley yellow dwarf virus. So if it's just a virus, we just need leaves. So they picked off a big handful of leaves, put them in a bag and brought them in. So I'm going to show you what we do with those things when they come in the lab. So traditionally, we use a method called ELISA, the enzyme-linked immunosorbent assay. It's based on proteins of certain organisms. Kansas State uses ELISA almost exclusively for all of their virus testing. Both us, Texas A&M, a lot of labs are starting to move towards real-time or conventional PCR. So PCR stands for polymerase chain reaction, and I'm going to show you some pictures of what that is, because these researchers throw those terms around all the time. I'm going to try to break it down so you can see what that actually means. So ELISA, basically anytime you bring us a sample, I usually have to get a piece of the plant and some sap. So we're going to take some of those symptomatic leaves. This little bag has some plastic mesh in it so I can grind it up. Some of you saw that this morning. It's in a solution. It's called a buffer. It's basically a salt solution that makes viruses happy. They don't stick together and they don't fall out of solution. We take that plant sap, and usually we're working with these micro test wells is what these are called. We can have them in a whole plate format or a strip format, but we're putting some of your sap in and testing it. So this is one of 4 to 6 steps where we're pipetting and washing the plate. This process takes 2 to 3 days. And so where we put some sap in, we wait. We put another chemical in, we wait. Some of the steps we may have to do overnight. But in the end, what we get is a color change. So if it's clear, we didn't find anything. There was no virus or whatever organism we were looking for. Whereas if it's yellow, we found something. And you can kind of do this visually. You can get that idea, but sometimes we get these kind of, is it yellow or not yellow? And so I have a lot of equipment in the lab that helps interpret data. And so one of the things we have is something called a plate reader. And the plate reader, pretty basic, it basically shines light. If it's clear, very little light is absorbed, we get a very low number. If the more yellow it is, the more light is absorbed and we get a bigger number. So this is kind of an example of what our plate reader spits out. So here we're testing for wheat streak virus. Anytime we test, we want controls. Healthy wheat should be healthy, right? Buffer only. What if we got something in it and it reacted? We want that not to have any color in it. And then we always want a positive control to validate our test. So we put this in our plate reader and it spits out numbers. And basically the healthy, hardly any number is there, very low. Same with the buffer. And then we see that the wheat streak positive control gave us some higher numbers. It's usually about 3 times plus. And where that matters, here, this is one of our samples from 2023. This was our 722nd sample in 2023. And we have some pretty high numbers. So this is what it would look like if something is positive for wheat streak. You can see some of those other numbers are much lower. Those would be things that tested negative. So that's how ELISA works. But again, it takes about 3 days to get an answer. So we have switched almost entirely to RNA and DNA testing methods for a lot of plant pathogens. Kind of start with the same process. We have to have some symptomatic leaves and we have to grind it up. This time, we will put some leaves in a little leaf pieces, technically, in a little tube. And this is Sarah immersing this in liquid nitrogen. So some of you might recognize a dewar. If you have cattle, that holds liquid nitrogen. We can freeze our tubes and we put it in this machine called a bead beater. And so we have our wheat leaves as well as some glass beads, and it just turns it to dust. So some of you got to see lots of different grinding equipment, whether we're talking about soil, branches from trees, roots. We have all the seed, all kinds of different equipment to get the DNA and RNA out of plants. After this, I'm not going to go into this, but this is where we just get to be scientists and we get to squirt our pipette a whole lot, put things in centrifuges or vortexes. Very often we're following a kit instruction, but in the end, ba-boom, we get some RNA or DNA extracted. That's really our goal. That process, that using that kit, depending on the kit, less than a half an hour. Although if we have a lot of samples coming in, there is a little bit of extra time of processing each one. Then this is where we do our PCR, the start process. So we're basically going to mix up a lot of chemicals to make this magic happen. So these machines are our thermocyclers. These are basically RNA and DNA copy machines. With your copier, you need toner, right? That is what is specific to our virus. So if we're testing for wheat streak, we're going to put in the toner for wheat streak. If wheat streak is there, it's going to make copies of it. If it's not there, we're not going to get any copies. In order to visualize this, you guys know what Jell-O is. We basically make a gel, kind of a semi-solid. It doesn't have any color or flavor. It's just clear. But we are able to run our DNA on an agarose gel. And where you see these little blips, those are like your stacks of copy paper, right? We copied wheat streak or whatever organism we were testing for. This area where there's no little blips, fragments, or lines, we might call them, meant we didn't find it. And so we do this for most of the virus testing we do. This is called conventional PCR, where we have to run it out on a gel. This process, we go from 2 to 3 days. We're down to maybe 6 hours. Often it's overnight just because some things it's more convenient. Now we've switched for some viruses like wheat viruses almost exclusively to real-time PCR. So some of you may have taken a real-time PCR COVID test where they got the results back to you more quickly. It's basically, this is our copy machine. This time, instead of having to run it out on a gel and see those kind of stacks of paper, we get exponential growth curves if it's making copies. So this is Sarah pointing out sort of this logarithmic series of curves where we see that we amplified whatever we were looking for. So we found what we were looking at. The ones where there's just kind of messy, we didn't really make any copies, and this machine will put out numerical data. So we go from about 3 days to 6 hours or overnight, and now we're at 2 hours. And so we know when you guys are coming in that you want those answers. Yes, what are you going to do about it? Well, you don't know yet, but you want to know. And so we're trying to get those answers more quickly, and anytime something comes in, we get anywhere from 2,000 to 7,000 samples in a year. It depends how busy Kenny makes me, actually. Last year, I think we were closer to 7,000 because of them. This year, we're a lot lower. But, as soon as we get that sample, Katie lets you know, we got it. Sarah and I try to let you know we're working on it. This is when we expect results. I always say, if you're wondering, we may be busy. I'm over here today. They know the results of the tests that have been run. I just haven't sent the report. So always feel free to call us. And we're not always the best on answering phone messages. I'll say that. Sometimes there's just a lot of them. So call again. So let's go back to that sample. This person was worried about viruses, so we tested it for, usually these are the main 4 that we test for: wheat streak, high plains, triticum, and barley yellow dwarf, and it was negative. So what's that mean? So our lab basically is here to help you rule out certain things. We can test and we can tell you yes or no. And then it's going to be looking at, well, what else is going on? So I always encourage people take pictures, get overall shots of the field, closer views of the problem. And very often, if we rule out pests and pathogens, we're going to start pulling in other specialists, Dr. DeSilver, Dr. Arnall, Dr. Lofton, and saying, hey, what else could be going on? So here's another picture they sent, and looking at that, I'm like, wow, that's really uniform. I'm starting to, viruses are just not usually quite that uniform. Let's see the bigger picture. And then we start to see something odd. We see, wait a minute, why is this yellow and this is green? So looks like some kind of fertility issue. And a lot of times this is where I don't get clued in on the answer. We may suggest that they have soil and nutrient tests. We'll have them refer them to Dr. Arnall, go back to him. This particular grower said, yeah, we agree. We ruled out virus. We think it is a nutrient issue, but in this case, we're just going to graze it out, and we're not going to worry about putting any more investment into this. So that's kind of an example of what we do now. So we do primarily test for real time. Right now, we have it set up for wheat streak, triticum, and barley yellow dwarf. Sarah's working on adding high plains into that. Some of you may be aware that Kansas had a tremendous problem, both wheat streak and triticum. We're always testing for these. We didn't have that last year. We did have wheat streak, but we weren't finding the volumes of triticum mosaic that they had. And it is something we're always testing for. So we can test for other viruses. We just kind of react to what people send us. So let's see, Jennifer Patterson, how much does it cost for me to run these tests for your clients? Nothing. That is exactly how much I charge you. Nothing. Up to 10 samples per year, right, Kenny? Because he sends me thousands. So we charge him a lot. And if you're a crop advisor, If you put your name on it, I'm going to say, okay, this is your first sample, second sample of the year. But if you write John Smith on there, I'm going to say this is John Smith's first sample of the year. So there's no cost other than you getting it to us. We have grant funding. We have funding from the National Plant Diagnostic Lab. We have really good clients like Kenny that are helping to subsidize your costs. And so hopefully we won't have to charge. And let Dr. Doy know we're doing a great job. So she keeps helping us with some extension funding. So wheat viruses, if you are specifically testing for a virus, all we need is some of the symptomatic foliage. We don't need a whole plant. If you need to mail it to us, it's not going to cost that much just to mail a baggie of leaves. Don't forget to send those images, sickplants@okstate.edu. It's not that hard. So here's another field. Again, try to get an overall image and then get some closer views. I like at least 5 pictures. Eventually, hopefully you start to see individual leaves where we can see streaking. This is what we actually got into the lab. And this is one that had wheat streak mosaic virus, negative for high plains and triticum. So I am going to put some management slides up here. I'm probably not going to read everything on this slide, so you can refer back when Dr. Arnell posts all this. But with wheat streak, triticum mosaic, and high plains, they all have the same arthropod that transmits them. It's the wheat curl mite. Very teeny tiny critter. You're not going to see it. 1/5 the size of a spider mite. So most of you probably, well, if you're like me and you start to need glasses, you're not going to see it. But we look for them under the microscope. And the thing that happens with these wheat curl mites, they survive a little bit in the winter, but populations are low. In the spring, they start to reproduce. They're going to build up during the summer. Kansas did a survey this year where they were finding actually quite a few of them on volunteer wheat, corn, and other grassy weeds. And so if you go out and you plant without thinking about that green bridge, if you had it last year, you're probably going to have it the next year. So they had a strong, advertising system and everything else, trying to tell people to break that green bridge, something we've said for years, but hopefully the end of this next season, we'll have good data to see if they really reduce their levels of wheat streak and triticum because it was so bad. Delaying fall planting, one thing about that is that because those mites are less reproductive when it gets cooler, you may escape some of the infection as they're not building up as quickly. There are some resistant varieties out there. And so barley yellow dwarf has a different vector. These are aphids, several different kinds of aphids. Some of the same management strategies, I will say for barley yellow dwarf, if you're having a lot of trouble with it, there are seed treatments that can help with that. Also scouting for aphids and insecticides. So okay, so moving on to some leaf spots and root and crown rot, just showing you how we diagnose these things in the lab. A lot of times this was from an extension educator, and he said, I want to know if this spot is the same as these spots. We're finding all these different spots. Are they all the same or are they different? And from the photos, we said, we think this is just tan spot, but let's send it in so that we can actually look at it. A lot of times for things that are on the foliage, we can just use microscopy, sometimes some moist incubation. We often start by looking at it under a dissecting scope. Look at these lesions. I don't know, you can see kind of some hairy stuff growing in there. Is that the fungus that we're interested in, or is that just because it's dead tissue? And as we get closer and closer with microscopes, eventually the image that's furthest to the right, that actually is the tan spot fungus. And that was the main thing that we found on that sample that came in. Some others, what is this? Is this septoria leaf spot or something else? How about that one? It doesn't look as, is that Parastaginospora? What is this? Spot blotch. And so that's what I'll do. I will look at it under the microscope at those spores so we can tell you exactly what you're dealing with. Leaf or root rot and crown rot fungi. That seems to be, for as far as wheat goes, the biggest things we have seen the last 2 years. So these are the kind of symptoms you might see some yellowing, and a lot of people, what they may not notice any of this early on, but get closer to harvest, we start getting a lot of these white heads or empty heads. If you actually start peeling some of those lower leaves off some of these plants, you can see the bottom stems, the crown, and the roots of those plants don't look good. And sometimes some of these colors can be significant. This pink color, probably fusarium, dryland root rot, but lots of them cause this browning. Even fusarium can. And so for that process, we're actually going to culture it out. So we're going to focus on this region between kind of really brown and almost dead and what's normal and healthy. We're going to put some little pieces in a cup. We're going to surface sterilize them with ethanol and bleach and culture it out. If it's just a leaf spot fungi, a lot of times I can ID that the same day or the next day. This culturing can take 2 or 3 weeks. It just depends on the fungus and how fast it wants to grow. We get all different kinds of fungi and bacteria out. And so my job again is to take it back to the microscope, try to see what spores are there. Or sometimes these things just will not make structures that we need to ID. So we'll put them back in that DNA copy machine and have it sequenced. I do try to keep everybody updated throughout the process. So when we're really busy, we may not send the emails quite as frequently, but again, you are welcome to call us. So why are we seeing so much of this root rot and crown rot? I feel like the last 2 years, we've almost had a little bit of drought followed by a lot of rain, or started with a lot of rain, then it got dry, then it got wet. And that seems to predispose these plants to it. Other things that can be involved when you get those warm days, in February, where it goes up to 80 degrees, that seems to make these problems more severe. Other issues, soil compaction, nutrients can be involved. And then not rotating, you can start to get this to build up. Lots of management for these root rot fungi. I'm not going to go through all of these. I will say one failure that I see is sometimes people rotate their crop, but they don't do any weed control. And so if you still have a lot of grassy weeds, you haven't really broke that cycle. Another thing I just want to mention is fungicide seed treatments might be available, and we could be talking about soybeans, we could be talking about green beans, corn, whatever. We might put a fungicide seed treatment on there, but there's 2 things. One, fungicide is not going to work for every fungus out there or fungal-like organism out there. And they don't last forever. So they do help with stand establishment and emergence, but they're not save-alls. And just some more, just some general management for root rot fungi. I'm not going to go through it, but it is there for referral. So I think I can mostly skip through the corn stunt thing since Ashley covered it, maybe get us back on schedule. I will say most of the testing in 2024 was done in our lab. Corn stunt spiroplasma, definitely of the 4 pathogens, is the main one that we are dealing with. This is, you've seen maps before, and the one thing I did want to point out, Ashley showed a map of where the corn leafhopper was found. This is actually a QR code to where you can find these maps. So this one will specifically take you to the page for corn stunt. Some crop advisors were asking, where is this right now? What's the status? I think Dr. Dufik's been updating this as much as she's able to, but just know that a lot of times with corn stunt, there is a process, and all the 2025 testing was done by the students and visiting scientists in her lab, and it takes time. So it's probably lags at least a month or so behind. But just for next year, put that somewhere that you can refer back to it if you want to monitor that. I was going to mention this, Dr. Lofton, Dr. Dufik, some of you crop advisors all brought this to us. We started getting these, I think, in May and June, and this is not corn stunt. So we're seeing mottle and mosaic on corn, and it kind of stumped me because normally I can get this in. We run all of our panel of tests, and for what we thought this was going to be, who's took a rapid COVID test or pregnancy test? Kind of looks like that. That is where you get one line, you did it right, 2 lines, you found the organism. And we thought this was going to be maize dwarf mosaic, but our tests weren't giving us that. So we had to go back to PCR and RT-PCR. And as it turns out, the company that was selling these rapid tests, apparently they're not working as well. So maybe there's some new virus variants or changes. And so this is, in fact, maize dwarf mosaic. We just couldn't normally we can give the answer in 30 minutes, just like your rapid COVID test. But it took a couple of days because we needed to run more substantial tests and have it sequenced. And so if you saw that this year. So again, free up to 10 samples a year. You can submit a sample through any county extension office. Some of our county educators are here. You can mail it directly to us. That's fine. Or you can bring it to us. And I'm going to show you how in a moment. This is QR code to our website if you're trying to figure out how to collect it, how to package it, how to get in contact with us. Just Google Pediddle OK State, and it'll bring you to it as well. Or call your county extension office and ask them to send it to you if you need our phone numbers or anything. So I'm going to hold a second. People are taking photos. That's good. Somebody's paying attention. All 4 of you. So we actually have a parking space for you because right now there's not many people here. Now, parking services will still give you a ticket if you did not put that parking permit. I don't care. They're out there all the time. So we're here in the purple in Ag Hall. My lab is this orange box over in Noble Research Center, and that parking space is right there. And it says Pediddle customers. We've actually added a little thing. Come in and give us your tag numbers just in case those parking people think that you're off. I don't know what they think you're off doing. We'll add you to our list. This QR code is actually GPS coordinates to that parking space. So if you put it into Google Maps, it'll get you there. I will say, it's kind of scary, but ever since both my children are now drivers and I don't have to do the school pickup thing, I work from 6 to 2:30. And so for some of you who would sneak outside the lab and drop things off at 7 a.m., I'm there now. And Sarah is usually most days in the lab until about 6:30 p.m. So we usually have someone there if you want to ask questions or talk to us. These are some of the samples that we get. You know, it's best. I always think it's best when you can drive it to us and not try to shove it in a bag. This is Josh Bushong packaged all these. So you might remember that from a couple years ago. It's actually a great job, Josh. That's why I'm using it. This is pretty typical of what we get. Wheat stuffed in a Ziploc. It's usually too tall. What I would say is if you can try to seal this, mainly we want to try to keep the dirt off the leaves, seal it as best you can, put it inside of a bigger bag just so it doesn't dry out. Soybeans, this one, somebody just carried in the plants. They had rinsed off the roots and we put them in a plastic bag to keep them fresh until we looked at it. A lot of times people bring things in buckets. We'll give you back your buckets. I know they're important. Again, if it's just virus testing or leaf spot, leaves are fine. And that is my contact information. So I do want to say, Ashley, when you were showing and the guy sweeping, I had this vision of okay, girl, I'm sorry, whoever it was. Anyway, sweeping, and you were saying you weren't tall enough. I had this vision, you go to like Disney and these people are on these tall stilt things. You just need a second career as a stilt walker, and then you could do it. So, yeah. So I'm going to tell your husband new Christmas gift. Any questions? If not, that's okay. Okay. Darn it.
Some of these diseases that are soil borne, are they being harbored by the last crop into the soil?
So the question, some of these diseases that are soil borne, are they being harbored? Yes. Very often they are. So that's why crop rotation is important in managing them. I would say there's so many different soil borne pathogens. It's hard to speak, specifically about one, but should we find you have a certain one, I always like to test the plant. Let's find out exactly what you're dealing with, because then we can come up with the best management strategy for your situation.
Well, it almost seems like we need to go back to the moldboard plow.
I will say something like, if you think about like corn and wheat, they're very closely related. So they share a lot of pathogens. The further you get from corn, if you switch to soybeans, they're not that closely related. A lot of times they don't share the same pests and pathogens. That's why when you go home and you have a cold or a virus, you don't necessarily give that to your dog or cat. You might think they're family, but they're really not that closely related. So trying to break those cycles can be very helpful. All right.
I'm sorry. He makes me keep on going up there. I'm sorry. All right. So I'm also giving you an introduction to Max. So this is Maxwell Smith, Oklahoma native. Well, no, you were born in Texas, right?
That is true.
Yeah. All right. See, there you go.
Oh, got
There you go.
that.
But he'll claim Oklahoma as home because that's where you spent most of your time. So Max is our IPM cotton specialist. So when I work in cotton stuff, it's because Max lets me, because that's his territory. But Max has a really strong background in weed science. I do not have that background, so I'm glad to have Max around. But he's going to talk with y'all about cotton IPM management strategies, and maybe he can field some cotton leafhopper questions too. We'll see what he does.
I tried to leave that for you. All right, like she said, I'm the IPM for cotton assistant extension specialist. I'm not a full-blown specialist yet, like Jen was. But in my role, I cover all the disciplines of IPM. So my background, like she mentioned, is in weed science. That's my bread and butter. That's where my heart's at. But it's pest management's part of it, and all these systems interact together. So we're going to talk a little bit about each of them, kind of some of the bigger issues we've been dealing with, at least in the 3 years I've been back in Oklahoma, and hit some of what's been working, what hadn't been working, maybe what's coming. So, like I said, I'm a weed scientist, so we're going to start with weed management. I always like to start my weeds management talks like this and give you the bad news first, and then we'll get into how we're dealing with it. So, just wanted to give you an update on where we're at worldwide with herbicide resistance. So as of, this was last week, I actually checked it again this morning. We still do have 539 unique cases of herbicide resistance worldwide. So those unique cases are a specific weed species to a specific site of action. We've got 31 known sites of action. As of currently what's on the market, 21 of those will have a case of resistance too. Across 168 different active ingredients. It's a lot of different active ingredients. A lot of those active ingredients belong to our group 2, our ALS type herbicides. A group of herbicides that came out in the 70s and 80s was widely used in wheat production across the US and worldwide. And we saw a huge uptick in those cases really before anything else. And then in the 90s, when the Roundup Ready technologies were released, and that specific active ingredient started getting used widely around the world, we saw a huge uptick in that group 9 or glyphosate active ingredient area. So these 539 cases, I guess the caveat to this is only what's been tested in a dose response study and published to this website. There's likely a much larger number than what is actually reported here, but this is what we do have hard data to back up. So just to look at some of the more current cases, not really anything new as far as the species we're seeing. Seeing a lot of our lolium grass species, some of our amaranthus species, Johnson grass type plants as well. And as you can see, that group 2 ALS group shows up quite often, along with our group 1, that's our graminicides, and then our group 9, like I said, our glyphosates. So those have definitely been the more troublesome active ingredients and sites of action as of late. As you can see, the other thing that's really scary that keeps happening, we're getting multiple resistances. So resistance to multiple different sites of action within the same species. These weeds are adapting to be able to overcome several of the different tools we're throwing at them, which is just going to roll right into some of the principles we're going to talk about here in a second. So just to look at Oklahoma specifically, as of 2018 was our last case, only 10 reported cases in Oklahoma. Many of those to our group 1s, group 2s, and group 9s as well. As you can see, glyphosate pops up a lot here in the last 15 years, as well as some of our older group 2 chemistries as well. As you can see, the weeds that pop up are some of our more troublesome weeds, our Italian ryegrass, Palmer amaranth, horseweeds, kochias, those weeds we deal with all the time and continue to cause a problem for us. And then specifically, just to look at what we're seeing in the world of cotton, these are our most recent cases we've seen in cotton. As you can see here over and over again, Palmer amaranth, Palmer amaranth, Palmer amaranth, Palmer amaranth relatives like our tall water hemp. That amaranthus species complex has definitely been the driver weed in the world of cotton weed management for sure for the last 20 years. The other thing I want to point out here, this is of more concern as we haven't really had any new technologies hit the market in cotton weed control in the last decade or so. We got a couple cases of resistance to our dicambas in that XtendFlex package. And we've also got some recent cases to our glufosinate, so our Liberty type herbicides. Still off to the east, North Carolina, Arkansas, Tennessee is where we're seeing those. What's really scary about this Tennessee and Arkansas population, they are right across the Mississippi River from each other. They haven't crossed with each other and caused that multiple resistance yet, but they are staring at each other. And as soon as they make that cross, that's going to be a difficult population to deal with. All right, so let's get off the bad news and talk about what we can do about it. So I just wanted to set up some background on why this is so important for cotton. Our cotton requires an 8-week weed-free period right at the beginning of the season. Now, that's going to change a little bit depending on which literature you're looking at. Some of it says 40 days all the way up to 56 days. I like to say 8 weeks just to be safe. But if we can keep it weed-free for 8 weeks, that's going to give us our best chance to achieve our maximum yields. I like to liken that cotton plant to a baby lamb. We talked about sheep earlier. It's looking for a way to die right when it comes out of the ground. It just wants to die. But if we can get it and get it up growing, get it on the ground, it really becomes really competitive, makes it really hard to kill, and can really outcompete a bunch of stuff. But we really got to baby it right there at the beginning. Excessive weeds can make cotton harvest really difficult. So as a weed scientist, we have to harvest those plots at the end of the year every year, and it is a pain. I couldn't imagine doing that on a full farm scale. So just making sure we're keeping those clean helps us out at the end of the year. You can see how difficult that would be to run a picker or a stripper through, and look how much cotton we've lost in these areas compared to what's around it where we kept it pretty clean. The other thing that's kind of become a buzzword in weed science is this idea of a soil seed bank. And for a while, kind of the policy was zero tolerance. We've kind of gotten away from that. I mean, the cost of everything keeps going up and what we can sell everything for keeps going down. So zero tolerance may not be economically feasible, but what we still want to try to do is manage those weeds, keep them from producing seed so that seed doesn't return to the soil seed bank. So then we're not fighting that problem moving forward in the future years. When I was in Lubbock in grad school, we were actually part of some studies where we buried some Palmer pigweed seeds at different depths and then recovered them after 2 years, 5 years, so on and so forth. Well, what we found, that project is still going on. I left before it was over. But at our 2-year cycle, at just the 2-inch depth where we buried that Palmer amaranth seed, after 2 years, that seed was 98% non-viable. So we really reduced the viability of one of our driver weeds just by keeping the weeds managed for 2 seasons. Not 100% viability loss, but it dramatically goes down. The other thing to think about when it comes to weed seed hitting the soil and getting back into that seed bank, one Palmer amaranth plant, a mature, favorable condition Palmer amaranth plant, can produce anywhere from about 600,000 to 1.3 million seeds per plant. So just letting 1 or 2 get away can really cause us a problem moving forward. So it's really important to make sure we're not allowing these weeds to go to seed and cause problems in the future. All right, and then I want to talk about some best management practices, and this is kind of going to overlap with some of the stuff I'm going to talk about in a minute with insects and nematodes as well. We'll just start right here, though. Know your field. The fields you consult on, the fields you farm, you know them better than anybody else. You know what pests you're dealing with. You know your good areas, your bad areas. So make a plan kind of tailored to that. You're going to know if Palmer pigweed is your driver weed or if it's not. And if it's not, we need to retailor that herbicide program. Use multiple effective modes of action. I really need to highlight that on this slide. Using effective modes of action. Like I just said, those group 2s and group 9s, there's tons of cases of herbicide resistance, and that mode of action is no longer effective on several of our weed species. So just because we're including our group 9s and group 2s doesn't mean we're being effective with it. So what we need to do is make sure we're putting those modes of action into a system so we're throwing effective modes of action at that weed species every year. Mechanical controls when they're feasible. So in the last 20, 25, 30 years, there's been a big shift to no-till, and I realize that's not always feasible. But if you are in a minimal till or a conventional till system, mechanical control is still a really good option to control weeds. There's no herbicide resistance when we're talking about steel and iron running through the ground. What I will say about that, though, is that's not the case for every weed species. I'm going to use bindweed as our example. So when we plow bindweed, a lot of times what we're doing is we're just kind of spreading it around the field. It's going to reroot and cause problems across that field. So kind of keep that in mind with your situation. It is a really good option for a lot of our annual type weeds, not always with our perennials. Using residual herbicides. And with the environment, with what's happened with all the lawsuits and court cases and EPA registration, using these residual herbicides really helps us out in the long run when we don't know if we're going to have a good post-emergence option to help us out. Use those label rates and carrier volumes, and I'll add to that, and the correct nozzles. That is really important. All that stuff is on the label for a reason. Anybody in the pest management field is always going to tell you the label is the law. And the reason the label is the law is because they've done the testing. They've got the data either from internal sources or university sources to back up what they put on that label, because that's what's going to help that herbicide or whatever do its best, the best it can. Spray at appropriate weed sizes. And I actually sat through a presentation with Dr. Todd Ballman, who was here for many years and then decided to hop ship on us. But he made a really good point. Not spraying at perceived weed size, but at actual weed size. You may think a weed is only 4 inches tall, but you actually get out there into it, it may be 6 or 8 inches tall. So make sure we're getting those weeds when they're 2 to 4 inches tall. It's going to allow us to get our best coverage on that weed and give that herbicide its best shot. And then the concept of overlaying those residuals, not just using them, but making sure we're overlaying. Another word that's also used for this is overlapping. So what I'm talking about, I'm going to use cotton as our example. So we plant our cotton crop. We go out with our 2-way pre-emergent mix right behind the planter. So we've got 2 good modes of action working in that soil to give us a barrier. So 3 to 4 weeks, that residual herbicide package is going to start to play out. So when we come back across with our post-emergent shot, we put another residual herbicide in that tank. So as this one's playing out, we're adding another barrier to get us a few more weeks into the season. Hopefully by that point, we've reached our 56-day window. That cotton's competitive. Maybe we're getting close to canopy closure and can get some good shading on that soil to help weeds from emerging, stuff like that. But make sure we're overlaying those residuals, keeping a constant barrier there in the soil that they have to fight through before they ever get up. All right, now let's hop into some data. So this herbicide package is our newest in cotton. as of date. So with this Accent Flex package, the seed was on the market this past year. The herbicide is still waiting for EPA approval. But we've been testing it here at OSU for 6-7 years. I myself been looking at it since 2020. So we've got lots of good data on it and know how it's going to work whenever we do get that EPA registration. All right, this is some data. This work was done at the Fort Cobb Research Station last year in the 2024 growing season. I don't know if y'all have ever been to that station. They allow me to grow weeds and they grow well at that station. We've got a tremendous population of Palmer pigweed, also Texas panicum, and our ivy leaf morning glories. Huge populations. It looks beautiful to me, but ugly to everybody else. So really what I wanted to point out here is we took basically most of our pre-emergent options that we have on the market that are widely used in Oklahoma, maybe with the exception of this break. That's kind of a newer one to production here in Oklahoma, and put them out by themselves as it's kind of been common practice in cotton weed management. Then what we did is we tank mixed every single one of those with this new Accent ISO herbicide to get two modes of action out there in the field that were both going to be effective. So as we can see with our one-way tank mixes, especially our Caprol and Prowl H2O here, at this, where are we at? 4 weeks after treatment, so about 28 days after we sprayed it, they are really starting to play out, starting to get some good flushes of weeds coming through here. Not really what we want to be seeing at this point. With the exception of our break, which like I said, that's kind of a newer one to Oklahoma production, and Reflex, which is also going to be Sinister, Vamos, goes by a bunch of different names. Those are holding on pretty well. But as you can see here, where we tank mixed and put two of those effective modes of action out in the field, we're still seeing 90+% control 4 weeks after treatment. We don't need to spray this field yet, or at least these treatments. And really what these treatments, I wish I'd have put up here is 6 weeks after. These were still holding on pretty good. Probably about that 6 week after mark is where we really triggered a spray, but we got a couple more weeks in there. They gave us some flexibility on when we got back across and put out our second post. Residual, making that overlapping barrier, gave us lots of flexibility. One thing to note when this technology does get approved, it's not going to be a chemistry you're going to put out by itself like you would with one of these. The recommendation is going to be you tank mix it. So take whatever your herbicide program was and just add this into it. It's going to help you a long ways. Maybe reduce one post-emergent shot. We may not need two of them anymore. It's going to add some flexibility as well as give us a larger spectrum of weed control. All right, and then talk about the post residuals that I was just emphasizing. So this was work also done last year. We did this at Altus, south of Altus, at that research station. They also let me grow weeds there, and it's another tremendous population. But really, this study, it's just something I wanted to look at. We took all our post-emergence residual options that we have in cotton and put them all out here and just sprayed them by themselves on some clean ground. Wanted to see how long they would hold on, how long they would last. So this is just looking 30 days after we sprayed it. We can see our dual and our outlook still hanging on pretty good, 85% plus control on this Palmer pigweed. You can see our warrant starting to play out a little bit. Anybody who's ever sprayed warrant or one of those encapsulated acetylchlores knows that one can be a little tricky. Some years it's going to be right here neck and neck. I just don't think we got the rainfall properly incorporated in this season. And then we can see our Zidua 95+% control. A caveat with Zidua in cotton, we cannot spray that over the top of our cotton. We got to go through with hoods and make sure we're not getting it on that crop, but it is a really strong active ingredient on a lot of our weedy species in our cotton production. And then this was essentially the same trial, just with a post burn down shot included into it. We did this at Fort Cobb. Used Warrant, which is encapsulated acetylchlore, and Versa, another encapsulated acetylchlore, and Dual. As you can see, where we use these residuals, really, really good control. Didn't matter which one you were using. Just as long as you were using it, we were getting really good control, especially of our Palmer pigweed species and also our morning glory species. Making sure we're getting a barrier out there. Those morning glory species can be pretty tough to get with residuals, but if we keep a strong package out there, we can kind of keep them in check. All right, and this is just kind of a visualization of that. So this treatment in the top left, that is a completely non-treated plot. You can see the weeds are starting to take over there, choke out those rows of cotton. That's not going to give us a very good shot at good yields at the end of the year. This middle picture is just post-emergence herbicides, no residuals. You can see we missed some because they were larger. We didn't get them controlled with our post-shot, and there's quite a few still out there. And then our bottom right, we used that pre-residual, we used that post-residual, we burned down what was up, getting really good weed control. And also, that cotton looked a lot healthier than what we're seeing hidden in this row. That cotton's growing off a lot better, and that's going to be true not just in cotton, but across all your crop species. If we can give them that good shot, they're going to help us out in the end too. All right, and then one more, just to look at a few more post-emergence residual options that are out there. This was not in crop. We did this on bare ground, so the crop is not helping us out any with shading or anything like that. We also couldn't do this in one crop because not all of these herbicides are labeled in a single crop. But what we did is we took all these different post options, and what I did is I added in the Zidua Plus. So that's going to be our Zidua, our pyroxasulfone plus Pursuit, our imazethapyr, and then Certain. So Certain is once again our Zidua, and then it's got an encapsulated saflufenicil or Sharpen. What I was really trying to demonstrate with this is where we got two modes of action out there, we really were able to get better control. So these blue bars are going to be our Palmer amaranth species, and as you can see there, our Certain rose right to the top. 34 days after we sprayed it, we didn't have a single pigweed up in any one of those plots. Our Zidua Plus didn't perform quite as well, but it was still kind of right there in line with everything else that we sprayed. Now looking at our Texas panicum species, these can be really difficult to control with residual herbicides, so we really got to attack them hard with a good package. We can see our Zidua Plus there did kind of raise itself to the top. We got those two modes of action working on it, getting us some better control. And then this looking at our morning glory species, where we got those multiple modes of action out there, we got a better shot at those morning glory species, kept them from coming up. Not trying to say go spray necessarily either one of those herbicides, but just trying to demonstrate when we use two effective modes of action, we get better control. All right, and then the other thing popped up just as soon as I got back to Oklahoma was this tumble windmill grass species. It has been a pain in no-till systems. And I put here just core species. So the one we're focused on is tumble windmill grass, but there's a bunch of those similar genus type plants that have been very difficult to control. We've got showy chloris has been really difficult as well down around the Altus area. So we're testing on a lot of these species. What we can do still is effectively manage this with tillage. It's just got to be timed right, and the weather's got to cooperate with us. If we plow and then it rains, this thing will root right back down. If we plow and can get that root and those rhizomes to dry up pretty good, we can get pretty good control. But our herbicidal control has been very variable. I've some success stories, playing around with some stuff, lots of failures. So we really wanted to look at this. So what we decided to do is we had some data from Todd Bauman. He did some of this work 20 years ago when he was down at Vernon. And he looked at enhanced rates compared to 1X field rates of a bunch of different herbicides. And he found those 1X field rates weren't doing any good, but those enhanced rates were helping out. So we just took all those 1X rates and didn't even include them. We just wanted to look and see if we could get this under control, if we enhanced our rates, increased our AMS, made sure we were getting good coverage. So we've got locations of this at Lahoma. I'm doing one down at Davidson, and then we've got a counterpart at Texas A&M who's doing this at San Angelo as well. So I'm going to explain what these treatments here are at the bottom because there wasn't enough room to put all the rates and everything on here. So anywhere I've got RUPM3, that's our Roundup Power Max 3. We sprayed that at 40 ounces an acre. Our dual is at the 21 ounces. That is a labeled rate. We weren't looking for any burn down control with the dual, just looking to see if we put that dual in the tank, if it heated it up any. Extend, so that's our Extendamax. That was at the 22 ounces an acre. That's on the label, or was on the label. What we're looking at here is sometimes with our dicamba mixes, we can get some antagonism with some of our herbicides. So we were wanting to see if we saw that. So if we went to make this recommendation, we were making sure we weren't getting that antagonism prior to. And then our select, we went a quart per acre. So typically a pint to a pint and a half is kind of the going rate. We went a full quart, so basically a 2x rate. With the 1% crop oil, all of these treatments got 4 pounds per acre of AMS, pretty stout rate. And then the other thing we did, these were all sequential applications. So we sprayed these one time, about 10 to 14 days later, when these plants looked like they were going to recover, started to get some green back in them, we sprayed them again with the exact same treatment. Yes.
Was this established or was this first spray?
Yep. So this is established tumbleweed grass. So in its perennial nature, it's not seedling tumbleweed grass. We can still get pretty good control of the seedling grass because it doesn't have that rhizome helping it get out of it every single time. We found all these locations with established grasses that had good rhizomes on them that were coming back year after year. So 14 days after we sprayed our second shot, and this is at the Davidson location, so southwest part of the state, we really saw our select was giving us the best control. A lot of our Roundup mixes were kind of lacking here, which is going to be pretty interesting here in a moment when we switch locations. 28 days after, though, so our select kept working. Our Roundup started to catch back up after it had some time to work. Wasn't the best control, not as good as we wanted to see, but was giving us some promise with some of these treatments. Something to kind of knock this plant back. It's something you're going to have to stay on top of and not just continue to let recover and then restart. You're basically starting from zero every time you let it recover. Now, when we switch to our Lahoma location, so a completely different population, we see our Roundup mixes jumped right out to the top. They were doing really good. This is 14 days after the A, so this hadn't even got a second shot yet. Those Roundup mixes at those high rates with the AMS, with the high carrier volumes, we were getting really, really good control. Now, as we move 28 days after our second shot, everything's had time to work. We actually got pretty good control at this location. What I don't have data for up here is our San Angelo location. Nothing worked at that location. It did not matter. I'm digging into weather data because these environments are drastically different, seeing if there may be something there. It never rains in San Angelo except for this last year when it rained 11 inches in like 3 days. But outside of that, it's a really dry environment. So nothing was really working there. You can see our efficacy was a little bit less in that southwest part of the state where it's a little bit drier. We got up to Lahoma. They got nearly double the rainfall during this time that we saw at Davidson. We saw increased control. So just kind of give you an idea of what we're doing. No recommendations here yet because we haven't seen something really stick out to the top. We're going to add some more treatments, keep doing this. We're actually adding another location out on the high plains this next year, try to get a better data set on what's going to work. All right. Yeah, so this is 14 days after that second shot, and then 28 days after that second shot. And at this 28 days, we stopped there because we harvested these plants, got some biomass on them, checked out those rhizomes, stuff like that. So it was a destructive sampling. We couldn't let it keep going. But yeah, I took it out to 4 weeks after that second shot. So really, this was a 6-week long trial. And that's just to give you an idea of what this looks like. There on the left, that's a completely untreated one. There on the right, that's a select treatment down at Davidson. Did really good on that particular weed there. Burned it down really good. What you can find sometimes, you look like you got good control from the foliage. You pull it back, dig into those rhizomes a little bit. There's still some living tissue. So don't just because you see that think you got it. Make sure you're staying on top of it. Can you continue scouting for it? All right, to wrap up the weed control and then quickly talk about a couple things. Control our weeds early. That probably up to the first 8 weeks is critically important. Using those multiple effective modes of action. Like I said, some of those aren't effective anymore. So making sure when we build that plan, we're using effective modes of action. Not to say we need to leave Roundup out of any system. It's still very effective on other species. But when we're talking about some of our driver weeds, make sure we're using effective modes of action. Use those residual herbicides, use those mechanical controls when we can. Use those correct carrier rates, carrier volumes and nozzles, critically important. Spray those weeds when they're small. Like I said, actual weed size versus perceived weed size, making sure we're actually getting them when they're small. And then as a weed scientist, we're all obligated to say this: start clean and stay clean. All right, I'm not going to hit a whole lot here because Ashley did a pretty good job. I just want to talk about a couple things, really. This new planazoline technology, that got approval back at the beginning of the month. Like Ashley mentioned, that brings us a new mode of action that we haven't had before. So that can be a really good tool in resistance management. I've been doing some testing with it. Ashley's been doing some testing with it. So we're continuing to look at it to really see what it's going to do and how we can work it into our systems. It's going to go by several different names depending on its use. The one we're looking at in cotton is going to be this Vertento. That's going to be the one we're looking at. Like I said, it's a new group 30. Our target species are going to be our Lygus species, our tarnished plant bugs, those types, thrips, stink bugs, mites. We are looking at it for cotton flea hopper. We have been attempting those studies. Flea hoppers don't really want to cooperate all that well, so we're having some trouble. Ashley's been looking at it in stink bugs and some soybeans, and there's lots of good data out there already on this new technology. All right, and the other new technology, not really new anymore, but still kind of one of the more exciting things as far as insect control in cotton is this Thrive-On technology. What Thrive-On brings us is really good management of our thrips species, and then can also help us out with some of our plant bug or Lygus species as well. And there's also some lab evidence that it's got some activity on these cotton flea hoppers. We're trying to test that as well. Like I said, flea hoppers have not been wanting to cooperate, but still going to really try that, try more locations this next year, try to get some good representative data. What I will say is when it comes to this thrips pressure, the data from across the cotton belt has been really good. They've seen really good control, and when I say control, that's kind of a loose term. This Thrive-On trait doesn't work the same way our old BT technologies did. You're not going to see a feeding mark and then a dead worm or a dead thrips laying there. What it's going to do is cause preferential feeding. So that thrips is going to go up, take a bite, realize it doesn't like that plant. It's not tasty or whatever. Wasn't cooked right. I don't know. But it's decided it doesn't like it and it's kind of going to move on. So a lot of times what we'll see is we still got those live thrips out in our field. They're not feeding. They're often lethargic because they haven't been feeding. They're not really doing anything to hurt our crop. And when we compare this back to non-Thrive-On traded, those populations are really high. Those thrips are continually to active feed and really cause some problems. I'm just going to skip over that. And when I'm talking about thrips damage, this is what we're really trying to avoid. And if you'll think back, when I was talking about weeds at first 40 to 56 days, that's where this plant's at right here. And that plant does not have a good shot at making a good yield because it got such bad thrips damage. So this is what we're really trying to avoid. And that's kind of what Thrive-On's bringing to the table. It's not to say there's not a lot of foliar options that are still effective and good. We just got to make sure we're scouting and staying on top of those things as well. Also, seed treatments like imidacloprid type seed treatments are still really good as that plant's coming up out of the ground to help us get a good start. But all right, let's just kind of start here and kind of go through our season is what we're looking for. So thrips are going to be our first thing as soon as it comes out of the ground. Then we're looking for flea hoppers here in Oklahoma. Also, it can go in hand with flea hoppers is our Lygus species, our tarnished plant bugs. But they're not really a huge issue in Oklahoma. So we're going to be looking for our flea hoppers, avoiding any blasting damage that we may see. Then we're going to be moving into bollworms and stink bugs. Like I said, with our BT technologies, bollworms really haven't been a problem. We did some testing this past year. Our B2 and B3s are still holding up really well in Oklahoma. B3 better than B2, but they're both still working pretty good. Stink bugs, kind of a tricky one. They can be elusive, kind of hard to scout for, hard to find out in the field. But what we're really looking for is this internal damage they may be causing, these internal warts on the inside of a locule or stained lint. So when we're scouting for these, making sure we're breaking open those bowls, looking for that internal damage. Aphids come and go, really weren't a bad problem this last year. Can be really big problems. What we're really trying to avoid is a sticky cotton that's got all that honeydew on it, can cause problems with harvest and ginning. Spider mites are maybe a once every 8 to 10 year problem. One thing I do want to stop and talk about here, though, if you remember back to Ashley's slides, that cotton jazzid symptomology, the early symptomology of that two-spotted leafhopper can look a lot like the spider mite damage. So make sure we're actually identifying what the pest is. Grasshoppers, not always a problem. Sometimes can be. Don't want to spend too much time on that. And then beneficial insects, making sure we're protecting those when we can, letting them do their jobs. All right, and then to wrap this up, I just want to hit real quick on the cotton nematodes we've been finding. So myself, Dr. Dufek and Dr. Dudak have identified the reniform nematode in Oklahoma cotton fields. We've got them now in 5 counties confirmed. This can be a really big issue if left unmanaged. The reniform nematode moves through tighter soils than a lot of our other nematodes. So typically our nematode ground we were thinking of was our sandier, looser soils where those nematodes can move freely. The reniform doesn't necessarily act that way. It can get through some of those tighter, clayier soils. Another thing they do that is pretty cool but kind of sucks, they can dehydrate and survive over seasons under adverse conditions. So they're not just going to die out real quick. They can survive for a long time and results in significant yield losses. So when we're scouting for this, looking for this stunted cotton, a lot of times we'll see a waviness pattern to the field. And really what we got to do is pull a soil sample to confirm this. And if we do have them, what can we do? We can rotate. Grain sorghum and corn are great non-hosts for the reniform nematode, not necessarily for all nematodes. We do have some newer resistant varieties to the reniform nematode. So if you do have this problem and you want to stay with cotton, we do have some options there. There are some chemical options. The old Timic now on the market is AgLogic can be an option there if you're set up to do that. And then preventing the spread is really the biggest thing you can do. Clean your equipment off when you're leaving field, not moving soil from field to field and spreading that problem around. So I'll leave that information up there. My contact information, I put out a newsletter a couple times a year during the cotton season. And then also, I'd really like to advise y'all to do this. I've teamed up with Texas A&M to do a weekly IPM update. We start in about May and go through September, giving a weekly update on what we're seeing in the fields. You don't necessarily have to sign up for my area. We're the rolling plains in southwest Oklahoma. For you guys on the eastern side of the state, maybe signing up for the Blacklands group may be a good idea to let you know what's coming your way. But with that, I'll call it good.
On the tumble windmill grass, have you considered gathering data on a fall application 30 to 45 days before freeze?
So we actually just wrapped up one of those at the Davidson location. I haven't got through all that data yet. We did get some pretty good control. We had the treatments out about 21 days before our first freeze. And once it froze, you could see the treatments that were working. Those plants died off much quicker. Really just don't have a whole lot of data. That was the only location we were able to get that out this year. But it is something we're looking at for sure. We'll let you know moving forward what we're actually seeing. Yeah, so I sprayed that right at the end of September, and then we got our first freeze down there about the 25th-ish of October. It wasn't very long, but it was enough to bite those plants and cause some damage.
Did you look at water quality in these applications and addition of surfactants?
So we didn't look at water quality, but what we did is we used RO water for all of these. What we were trying to do is take the water component out completely. So all of this was RO water, so we didn't have to worry about what that water may be doing to tie up our herbicides. We wanted to see just what herbicide package was going to give us the best shot. Yeah, there are some studies that need to go along with that, depending on what hard water you have, what those cations may be moving forward. But we tried to take that component out of this.
So I know at Lahoma, the population of Lahoma that we had in our field had both windmill and had tumble. We had 3 different species. Do they react differently to herbicide? 3 different types.
Yeah, they all will. That's what makes it important to know which species you have. A lot of these are really tough to be able to tell apart. The easiest way is if they've got a seed head, look at that seed head to tell them apart. There are some other trickier ways, looking at the ligules, looking at the hairs right around that ligule and around the auricle area can give us some good idea of what we're looking at. But yes, they do react